The world looks different after dark. The familiar hum of the daytime world fades, replaced by a quiet that can be both peaceful and unnerving. For those of us who have clocked in for a night shift, we know this quiet can sometimes hide things. Tonight, we're peeling back the curtain on that unsettling darkness. These aren't made-up tales for a campfire. These are 3 allegedly true horror stories from people who worked while the rest of the world was asleep. So dim the lights, check your locks, and get ready. Our first story comes from a guy named Mark, who used to be a security guard at a large, empty office building. His job was simple: patrol the floors, make sure everything was locked up tight, and watch the security monitors. For months, it was the easiest job he'd ever had. The only sounds were the buzz of the fluorescent lights and the hum of the servers. But one night that changed. He was on his usual patrol on the 4th floor when he heard a faint rhythmic tapping sound coming from down the hall. He figured it was just the building settling or maybe a pipe making noise. He continued his rounds, but the sound grew louder, more distinct. Tap, tap. It sounded like someone was tapping a fingernail on a glass window. Mark followed the sound to a large conference room at the end of the hall. The lights were off, the room completely dark except for the moonlight filtering through the massive windows. He peeked inside, and the tapping stopped. He scanned the room with his flashlight. Nothing. Just an empty table and a dozen chairs. He chuckled, feeling a little foolish, and turned to leave. That's when he heard it again, but this time it wasn't coming from the window. It was coming from right behind him. Tap, tap, tap. He spun around, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, heart hammering against his ribs. The room was still empty. But now, on the polished surface of the conference table, right where his light was shining, were 3 long, fresh scratch marks. He didn't finish his shift that night. He radioed his supervisor, said he was sick, and got out of there as fast as he could. He never found out what made those scratches, and he never went back to find out. Next, we head to a quiet, rural hospital. Our story comes from a nurse, let's call her Sarah, who was working the graveyard shift in a geriatric ward. This ward was in the oldest part of the hospital, a long, dimly lit corridor with rooms on either side. Most of her patients were sound asleep, but one patient, an elderly woman in room 207, had a habit of pressing her call button for no reason. Annoyed but professional, Sarah went to check on her. The old woman was sitting up in bed, her eyes wide with fear, staring at the empty corner of her room. "He's back," she whispered, her voice trembling. Sarah tried to calm her down, assuring her that no one was there, that she was safe. The woman just shook her head, pointing a shaky finger. "The tall man," she said. "He's always watching." Sarah assumed it was just dementia or a side effect of her medication. She gave the woman a sedative and returned to the nurse's station. About an hour later, the call button for room 207 lit up again. Sarah sighed and walked back down the hall. But as she approached the room, she felt a sudden, intense cold. The air grew heavy and the hair on her arms stood on end. She pushed the door open and her blood ran cold. The elderly woman was still in bed, but she wasn't alone. In the corner of the room, where the woman had been pointing earlier, stood a figure. It was impossibly tall and thin, a shadow so dark it seemed to absorb the dim light from the hallway. It had no face, no features, just a towering, slender silhouette. Sarah froze, unable to scream, unable to move. The tall man slowly turned its head, and even without eyes, she could feel it looking right at her. Then, as quickly as it appeared, it dissolved into the shadows. The woman in the bed let out a final, quiet breath. When the doctor arrived, he pronounced her time of death. The cause? Heart failure. Sarah never told anyone what she saw, but she requested a transfer to the day shift the very next morning. She says she still sees that tall, shadowy figure in her nightmares. For our final story, we go to a place that's already creepy enough during the day, a mannequin warehouse. A young man named Leo took a temporary job there as an overnight stalker. The warehouse was massive, filled with rows upon rows of silent, plastic figures in various states of dress. From the start, the place gave him the creeps. The way their blank eyes seemed to follow him, the eerie silence broken only by his own footsteps. His boss had joked on the first day, "Don't worry, they don't bite." Leo wished that was all he had to worry about. One night, he was organizing a new shipment of child-sized mannequins in a far corner of the warehouse. He had his back turned for just a minute, and when he turned back around, one of the mannequins was gone. He thought maybe he'd miscounted or that it had fallen over. He searched the aisle, but it was nowhere to be found. Shrugging it off, he went back to work, feeling a bit on edge. A little while later, he was working in a different section, aisles away, when he saw something out of the corner of his eye. At the very end of the long aisle, peeking out from behind a shelf, was the missing child mannequin. Its head was tilted as if it was watching him. Leo's heart skipped a beat. This had to be a prank. One of the other night shifters must be messing with him. He yelled out, "Very funny, guys!" But the only reply was silence. He cautiously walked down the aisle, but when he got to the end, the mannequin was gone again. Now he was genuinely scared. He started working faster, wanting to finish his tasks and get out. He was moving a crate when he heard a small giggle. It sounded like a little girl. It was coming from right behind him. He dropped the crate and whipped around. Standing there, not 3 feet away, was the small mannequin. Its painted smile seemed wider now, more menacing, and on its plastic cheek was a single fresh tear track glistening in the dim light. Leo didn't even punch out. He ran for the exit and never looked back. The warehouse closed down a few years later, but locals say that sometimes when you drive by at night, you can still see the small figure of a child mannequin standing in one of the dusty, broken windows. The night shift is a world of its own, a place where the ordinary can become terrifying in the blink of an eye. Are these just stories?